when I initially started experimenting, we didn't actually have enablement from a work perspective. So I was just experimenting and keeping things very generic in how I was thinking, in my own personal tool. And so I feel like when we bring it into a work environment, I see that anti-pattern of specifically how are we going to measure productivity and how are we going to do all those gains. And I think that almost preemptively, it neuters in a way the ability for people to have the space that I had, which was experiment. It doesn't have to, be a successful productivity hack or make progress there. And so that's one of the things I say to my team is just take the time to experiment, take the time to explore.
Here's the uncomfortable truth about AI. The gap isn't between companies, it's between leaders. Same tools, same access, same hype, but completely different outcomes. Why? Because AI exposes how you think. Your decision making, if it's unclear, AI will expose it. If your system is strong, AI compounds it. Across the executives I've worked with, from Slack to HSBC to American Airlines, the ones who win don't use more AI. They use it deliberately. They build a personal system, capture their thinking, pressure test their decisions, turn every interaction into reusable asset. We call it the CSTA loop in action. And the results, they're pretty consistent. 3 to 4x more meaningful decisions, up to 60% less preparation time and faster alignment across their teams. This isn't about becoming an AI expert, it's about becoming a better decision maker. All captured in our book, Artificial Organizations, out now.
Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode and it greatly supports our podcast.
Today's guest is someone leading AI where it actually matters, inside the commercial engine of the world's largest airline. Misty Shafer Sterne is the VP of Commercial for American Airlines, where she's responsible for driving the business user data and AI to make better decisions across pricing, customer experience, and revenue growth. And what makes her perspective so compelling is this. She's not working in theory. She's doing this inside a highly complex legacy organization where every decision has real operational and financial consequences. In this conversation, we unpack literally what it takes to lead AI at this level. How do you move from experimentation to something that actually shifts how the business runs? How do you bring teams along when the pace of change is so fast? And then how do you do it to make sure that AI doesn't generate more data but actually improves commercial performance? This isn't about hype or tools. It's about what it looks like to lead in AI when the stakes are real, to build in the open, to be the leader to go first, to share your experiences about how you're using these tools to improve your performance, to inspire your teams and the wider organizations. It's a fantastic show. It's also a case study in my new book, Artificial Organizations. I'm delighted to have Misty with us on the show. Okay, look, I've been really looking forward to doing this show. You know, when I started reaching out to people about understanding how senior leaders would want to use AI in their daily work, you were one with the first people that was just like, yeah, I'm all in. I want to give this a shot. You know, I'm experimenting myself. I want to see how far I can push it. And it was an absolute joy, sort of working with you through that process, just seeing the lights go on, the way you would challenge yourself to push your own ways of working it was a joy. But for many people, they're probably looking, at you as a senior leader, the way your career has changed from technical to leading teams to commercial groups. For you, when you look back, is there a moment maybe that at the time maybe it didn't mean a whole lot, but in retrospect you were like, you know what, this is a real sort of foundational principle of what I'm about and, just how I sort of tackle uncertainty, if you will, and try new things?
I think, when I go back even to my days of being a software architect, it was I've always struggled with perfection and trying to solve for the future. So when I think about my unlearning throughout my entire career, I remember having a little "done is better than perfect" sticker on my monitor because no one could perfect a Visio diagram like me back in the day. But it was really just trying to make sure it was holistic. And so I think as you progress in the leadership ranks, you go from being the person as the architect that's expected to have all the answers, to think about all of that. And then as you become the leader, you being the all-knowing actually becomes a lid for your organization. So over time, I feel like with every shift of my role or going to a new team, it's been embracing sort of that vulnerability of it's not my job to be all-knowing anymore or even to dive that deep in the domain, but it is my job to have good intuition, to trust my instincts, but more importantly, to ask really good questions. And so I think just over time, embracing asking good questions and not feeling like I'm not showing up in a power position just because I don't have all the answers, has been, a continual, what do they say? The universe gives you that lesson over and over until you learn it. So I wouldn't say that I'm perfect at that by any means. But I feel like that has been a recurring theme of kind of letting go of that control, but embracing the process of asking questions more than the journey of getting to the answer, more than having the perfect answer.
Yeah, that's so. I love hearing folks like yourself share that, because I think it's actually quite hard for many people, right? Especially as you're starting out in your career. Like you say, most people build their reputation through competency, through getting stuff done, especially in software engineering, right? Like you're the person who can fix the bug, the person who can solve, why the system is down, and there is a little bit of heroics that can go with that, but that transition you just sort of described, right, to much more curious focus, helping other people, asking better questions. Many people struggle with that transition, right? It's hard because your identity has to shift. And in many ways, I feel like as a lot of these new tools are coming into the workplace, where folks are hearing that these tools are going to change the way they work, some of them are hearing it's going to replace them, or their expertise is no longer, as credible or prestigious as before, right? So as someone who really embraced this, in a way that I haven't seen many people do, talk a little bit about yourself. Like, what were some of the things you had to, if you will, unlearn as you were starting to experiment using a lot of these AI tools to actually augment and enhance your way of working? What were some of the other challenges that you had to face as you went through that process personally, but also as a senior leader, where you're leading this massive technology organization and everyone's sort of looking at what you're doing? Again, something that many leaders struggle with because they feel like they don't know enough about this, and under pressure because all the lights are on them at the moment.
When I think about this, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the safe space that going through this process with you created for me as a leader. Because as a leader, you feel like I have to show up in every room and have every answer. We just talked about that. But I'll admit, when I was experimenting initially, a lot, and this has been over the last couple of years, so it will sound a little dated even today, but you felt like a lot of the promise that you and I talked about was task automation. So in the beginning, a lot of what I was trying to accomplish was, can I tackle my email inbox? I'm not a zero person. So I felt like I was chasing the productivity or those kind of hacks, if you will, and how could it help that? So I think the unlearn, or the process that in going through it with you, that really helped me and became like, once the light went on, it completely shifted, was that actually isn't the value for me as a leader. The value is like what we just talked about, asking good questions, pressure testing my ideas, having someone play devil's advocate. And I don't really remember how it happened. It just sort of happened accidentally. I think, part of my process is I'm a verbal processor and talk with my hands. Yeah. And we used to joke that I would have 5 simultaneous thoughts. That's kind of my superpower and my curse at the same time. And so it was a way for me to quickly capture those ideas before I lost them. So I started doing verbal notes in my phone. So then that transitioned over to these tools relatively easy. I could just do a brain dump of like, these are all the things, in my mind, or this is an idea I have, or I want to make sure I follow this process or review that. So it was kind of this smorgasbord of, task, ideas, but just getting the noise out of my brain in an external system. What the first superpower was, I was starting to externalize my brain. And in doing that, naturally these tools would structure it. because I kind of think in patterns. So when I would dump things, they would inherently sort of have these hidden patterns in them. And so that instantly just became accelerated all the thinking I was having, not just the way I'd group tasks, but also the ideas I was having, because it would help me. Once I got them out of my brain, I could more clearly see patterns of thought or patterns of systems and things like that. So the unlearning in the beginning was, as a senior leader, me going after productivity of getting through my inbox or some of those things wasn't the unlock. It wasn't going to make me any better necessarily. It might make me a little faster. And then when I shifted to using it as this thinking partner, and I love Brene Brown and call it rumbling. So once I had the, oh my goodness, idea that I had a 24/7 rumble partner, that I could dump my messy thoughts in a place without any judgment, it unlocked like the next level of thinking for me. Like, because I would spend a lot of time as a senior leader, what you and I talked about is I feel responsibility to not share too many half-baked ideas, because people can take my half-baked ideas and think that that's me asking them to do something. But I also don't want them to be perfect, because I want to invite that back and forth rhetoric. I want them to feel like they can help craft things, and I'm still open for, evolving it. So I feel like this has helped me kind of find that sweet spot where I can externalize my thinking, instantly pressure test it, have someone who doesn't have the work dynamics of reporting to me or being my peer or being my boss at play. So there's no problem with poking holes in my thinking, helping me find my blind spots. And so that just really unlocked more like accelerating, trusting my intuition.
Yeah,
Because I wouldn't say
it's
that my
amazing
ideas,
to watch.
yeah, I wouldn't say that my ideas change. It just helped me take them from thoughts to on paper, to verbalize them more clearly, to then instantly go to, I could like almost skip some steps of like brain dump, pressure test, refine, make sure it's authentically in my voice, and then I'm ready to go. And so it just accelerated that sort of personal process, which then makes all the, when I then take it to my team or have conversations with other people about it, it's just a little more crafted enough that they can actually respond to it.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying, and there's so many great points in there. Like the first one that you mentioned, this idea that so many people come from a perspective that this is about productivity, but sure, it is, but it feels like that's like step one in the process, right? That, as you say, this unlock is much more about actual performance, about how you show up, how you work with your team, how you do your best work, or even get to this idea of presence, like as you were describing, this feeling of all these thoughts in your head being captured, being synthesized, being driving to action as well, which is, again, fantastic, to hear you share that with people. Because, again, I think most leaders are still, when we did this study where we, surveyed 5,000 people on my mailing list of senior leaders, and all of them, well, that's not true, all of them, but we were in like the sort of 68 percentile where I'm using this for email, I'm using this to read documents, I'm making this incremental sort of performance improvement. But as you're describing this unlock, which I think again is for many senior leaders, getting to the place you're describing it's a whole new world, right? It's a different way of working. Like I love the way you're describing these examples where these like micro moments in your day where you could capture a thought as a voice note that ultimately goes into this database of your thinking that you can go back, and I love the way you describe it, play with it later. And play is a huge part of this, I think, for people to understand, like playing with ideas, pressure testing ideas, like making your thinking more resilient in a safe space before you sort of go to the team, or you even like request time of other people. You've done so much work to make this a thought that has merit that you want to test even further. Again, a bit like unit testing and integration testing again, right? I love how you're thinking about it. Right, so what were some of the fun little anecdotes that just, as you started to learn this method to, again, work aligned with your natural traits? This, again, I think is another huge part of what people need to hear is, you're not radically changing, how you behave. You're just working in flow, if you will. Like, as you say, you love to talk out loud. You love to rumble with people. Like, conversation is a huge part of your innovation process. So talk a little bit about maybe some of the fun anecdotes that you discovered as you started to, immerse this and really push it further.
Well, I think it was just that. It was how many ideas that I would have during a day and potentially lose them, or, I can't even tell you all the rudimentary post-it notes, emails to myself, voice notes on my phone.
Yeah, we all have these systems that we don't maximize, right? They're
Right.
good intent, but it's hard to capture them all again.
Or you go back to it, or you start it and you forget it. You go on vacation, you come back, you lose sight of using that. Like, I can't tell you how many planners I've used in the past. But when you think about that, for me, even taking it from my brain to physically write down, like, I'm already losing things. Like, because if I'm having 5 simultaneous thoughts, I can only write one at a time, So one is that. But then the other side of it is it also helps me filter things out, because I used to joke with someone on my team. I get excited and I would say, about an idea. And then he would repeat it back to me really slow. And when he said it slowly, I was like, well, now it doesn't sound like as good of an idea that you said it slowly. So sometimes even in that verbal processing, and by the way, I think you and I talked about that. That wasn't something that I figured out on my own. I learned that from my teenage son, who has dyslexia. And that was one of his amazing teachers made that recommendation to him, because he's really creative. She said, just capture your raw thoughts verbally and then come back and organize them. So I actually learned it from helping him with homework and things like that. So it wasn't even something that it was Captain Obvious once I tried it. But even in saying them out loud to get them out of my head, sometimes I'll filter them right then. As I say this out loud, okay, well, never mind. Now that I said that, it's not, and now I can follow that train of thought. Oh, I had this idea about blah, 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 the mobile app. As I say it out loud, now that I say that out loud, that either needs to be refined or throw away. I don't actually like it, but I still capture it, because I think what this has unlocked, these tools have unlocked for me, is the memory and the context of, like, maybe a random idea I had 6 months ago that didn't have legs. And then now I'm having a different idea, and now I'm able to see those and go, oh, now I can connect these patterns in this idea, and to combined, they have legs. And so I think it's sort of, for me, was an accumulation of bringing all of those sort of positive ways I'd figured out for my thinking and unlocking myself in a way, but I'd never been able to bring them all together, in one tool, and with the history and a an LLM that also helps with the pattern matching, because I'm a natural pattern matcher. So the way I think is kind of systems thinking. And then when you think that way and process, then it's really easy for an LLM to then see patterns as well and kind of help you in the background.
Well, this is the thing I think that certainly I experience in my own sort of world, right? Like, I'm dyslexic as well. So typing is actually an obstacle for me. It slows me down. All these tools now where I can talk, I'm not going from 60 words a minute, it's like 200 words a minute. So, I have increased information flow, which again, really helpful for me.
Right.
And to your point as well, increased capture. So this ability over time to be building up this sort of data assets over time of things I'm thinking, how are these things connected? That ability, as you're describing, when you're building this set of data assets that you can leverage later, is just, again, an outsized leverage point for many leaders to go back and say, over the last month, what were some of those themes that were coming up? When you see the response, does it reflect what you were thinking? Is there a new piece of insight there? Is there a gap? Is there a blind spot?
I would say, and there are times where it creates connections that I didn't. I think it was Steve Jobs that said you can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's been one of the unlocks of, I wouldn't have, I would have forgotten that I thought that 6 months ago, but now that it's connected, it makes total sense, and I can almost see the pattern in my thinking. Like, maybe it's confirmation that those two things are symptom, and if I ask the 5 whys, I get to the root cause. And that's sort of what it's helping me unlock. Now that it's been even better since you and I worked together, because now I have more history, more context to build on.
Yeah, and like this is the fun part, I think, for many people, right? Is that this is a machine that's learning with you, right? That, as you said, it's like your thinking partner, your rumble partner. This ability to help you prepare, right, for high stakes moments when you need clarity of thought, and sometimes where you have to get to that quickly when it's high stakes and short time. This ability to sort of go back and gather your thinking, gather your notes, and sort of say, right, oh, I've got to meet the CEO tomorrow. How do I prepare for that? How do I make sure I have my best thinking together so I show up present and as the person I want to be? So for many leaders, like you're in that type of a scenario, right, where like the airline industry, this week oil prices are tripling, like next week, there might be an accident and safety becomes an issue. Next week, it's this ever-evolving industry where, you can have huge sort of unexpected challenges arriving, and yet you've got to keep consistency of delivery and momentum and pace and team, right? So for someone like you in that leadership role, now you've gone through this sort of personal breakthrough, if you will. How are you seeing other team members need to unlearn? What does the industry start to need to think about unlearning to use these tools for even greater effect?
I mean, I think it's that evolution of productivity is, I don't even want to say it's the cost of entry, because there's a lot of days where I judge myself because I don't want to say I abandoned productivity, and maybe this was a gift for me in the timing. When I initially started experimenting, we didn't actually have enablement from a work perspective. So I was just experimenting and keeping things very generic in how I was thinking, in my own personal tool. And so I feel like when we bring it into a work environment, I see that anti-pattern of specifically how are we going to measure productivity and how are we going to, do all those gains. And I think that almost preemptively, it neuters in a way the ability for people to have the space that I had, which was experiment. It doesn't have to, be a successful productivity hack or make progress there. And so that's one of the things I say to my team is just take the time to experiment, take the time to explore. And I think the other thing it gives you is now the cost of me going through my thought on an idea and deciding to throw it away is so low that why wouldn't I do that? I have more ideas that have been pressure tested in the same amount of time. And it's not really about the volume of more, it's that the ones that I then dive deeper in, if they're higher quality at the start, I'm already starting with a higher quality hypothesis in a way. And I'm
These
able
are
to go with
such
that.
great points, Misty. I have to call them out of here. First of all, one, that pressure when the tools are rolled out for this productivity measure, right?
Yes.
It is such a counterintuitive thing to say, no, what we need to do is let people experiment, right? Not measure productivity from day one. Let them experiment. Amazing sort of insight. But the other point then that you're sharing, which I think is one of the things that people sometimes forget, and we learned this a lot in our venture studio about coming up with new business ideas and testing them. Success is not, I had one great idea and it turned out to be great. It's, I had 100 ideas, I pressure tested 100 of them, and there's one good idea that actually has merit. So this idea of a kill rate or a pause rate or getting to conclusion at speed, and this is what we call decision velocity in the book, is this ability to be making high confidence, high conviction decisions because you trust the information that you're getting and the information you're using to make those decisions, to keep investing, right? Not to invest in ideas that have no merit or take other people's time that are ultimately going to turn out not to be fruitful. But this ability to get to the high leverage, high conviction, high potential return that warrants more investment. So that is a huge insight.
You just made me, and this happens every time you and I talk. One of the things I try to do with my ideas, I think this is the former architect in me, as an architect, and I say it to my teams all the time now, every decision we make is a point in time decision. So we make it today. You just talked about all the volatility in the airline. We have a saying, every day's an adventure. But now what I do is, even when I pressure test ideas and I think, okay, well, that's not a good idea, I try to capture those footnotes of like, what is the current context of why is this not a good idea right now? Like, it's not a good idea because, we have cost pressure from a fuel perspective. So maybe that's something that in the current context this week with fuel prices, that makes that not as good of an idea. But later, if I were to come back to it, it could be a good idea in the right environment, or there's a technology constraint that makes it too cost prohibitive, or we don't see a way to really unlock it at scale right now. And so I try to capture, even in my thought, some of those, like these are the current constraints, or this is the current environment that just doesn't make this tenable for now. And then my hope is that as I build that memory over time, then I can start to question those things like, well, now if this has changed in the environment, what ideas should I resurrect? Or what are things that, just didn't make sense before, but now they do because technology's changed and things like that.
Again, just these are super insights for folks, right? Because again, I think it's this natural discipline, you have it intuitively, but I think it's important for folks to hear this, is this idea of a decision has context, it has constraints, it has information that's relevant at that time. As you and more people start to understand this, is that discipline of how you capture your notes now, it's bringing more color to the context, you're enriching the moment that you are capturing, because then you can go back to it. Like, this is funny for me, I have noticed some of my behavior changes. So I love using co-pilots in meetings, because I want to listen. I want to be very present with people, and I love that I have a tool that's capturing all the information and turning it into a data asset. But one of the behaviors I've learned in myself is specifically simple things. At the end of meetings, I have now this discipline where I always restate everything that we talked about on the meeting. This is my understanding of what we talked about, why this mattered, why we made this choice, why we're not making this choice. I almost sort of verbatim do a recap. And that, one, it's healthy for me because it makes the ideas go into my human head, but it also captures the context of why we are making these decisions, these choices in that moment to go back to later. And I never would have done that before without these support of these tools around me. I maybe would have tried to write it down as like notes 20 minutes later when I forgot half of them.
Yeah.
But now I'm like in context, mind focused, and in essence, like recapping, this is the thoughts I have at this moment in time, because that will compound later when, as you, in your examples, a dynamic shifts, a new market opens up, as you say, one of your adventurous moments, whether it's oil prices or safety issues or actually something great happening in the airline industry, like flights are all on time this week. These are really, really important things for people to learn, because that's new behavior, right? And for me and you, it's changing how we work, or changing our behavior. And for me, that's, again, a huge part of people to, I think, understand. It goes back to your productivity point. If you think AI is adopting tools, you might get the productivity minor gain, but it is nothing compared to if you can change your behavior and use these tools to enhance, augment, amplify, whatever your favorite word is, just your natural awesomeness, great things happen. So what else are you seeing now, like as the experimentation starts to go beyond yourself into the teams, into the company? Like what are some of the fun anecdotes you're starting to recognize?
Well, I think some of it was by me leading by example and sharing my journey. And it's, funny, I had an all hands recently, and you get the question of like everyone wanting to predict, like, what's this going to mean? And I can confidently say, look, the way I used this tool 6 months ago is totally different than the way I use it now. There will probably be a new feature tomorrow that will change the way I use it. So one, like showing my own vulnerability that, look, I'm on this journey with you. Like, none of us has figured it out. We're all, just writing the book as we go. And then them seeing me experiment opened it up for like my leaders and so I feel like in the last month even, we've had this inflection point in my organization where there was a lot of apprehension. What you said, it's going to take my job. And I love, and I should know who this is, but I'm pretty sure it was the NVIDIA CEO said AI won't take your job, but someone that is learning AI or uses the AI will. And so I use that quote a lot. And I'd say to them, like, look, that's true for me as a leader too. Like, I have to be able to keep up with the pace of change and make sure that I'm making good and sound decisions. And so I think that's kind of been the unlock of leading by example. You know, as it always is, people will watch what you do, not what you say. But I also have personal anecdotes that I can share in my journey. I think even from when you and I went through the process, then I would do like these verbal vomits of my ideas, but then I would go later and look at the typed text. Well, now, since then, now I can just have a conversation. So I have different, even since you and I work together, now I do, and we've enabled tools at work. So I have now a new process that I do when I get in my car to drive to work. I want to use my commute. So I have a prep for my day routine that I go through verbally just to make sure, you know, like have any new presentations come in that I need to review. And we have the ability for it to read presentations as a podcast.
Yes.
So I feel like it's allowing me to show up. And what you said, I love, I didn't want to kind of let that go about the end of meetings. It's a good practice to restate what we all agreed to in a meeting. But sometimes you would do it as everyone's leaving the meeting or walking out. And now the discipline of doing it with those tools is it gets captured. So let's say you have to have another meeting. It helps so much that everyone's showing up with the context. You don't have to repeat half the previous meeting. So I feel like it's keeping that flow going of ideas too. But these are just these small little adjustments to your frameworks that you need to make that then just, it's like a flywheel of, you know, momentum that builds on itself that are good practices, but now the value or the benefit of doing that practice far outweighs, like I hate when I leave a meeting and forget to do that. Now,
Right, and it's compounding.
until you get it. Yeah, the compound interest, that's what I was looking for, yeah.
Yeah, and it again for me too, in every part of my work now, it helps me again show up better, feel like I'm not carrying all this information in my head, which is heavy to carry in your head, right? Like I think that's where, as senior leaders, you know, you're going from one meeting to the next. There were 5 actions there. Did I get them all? You're in the next meeting and you're thinking about a decision from the last meeting, and you're like, this is a very difficult place. No person can hold all that information in their head. So I think having, as you even described at the start, like a place where you know it's being stored, a place where you're adding to it with your thoughts but during the day of an aha moment or something that you were like, oh, I need to make sure I remember that. Like that is a great place for a leader to have, so they can offload, as you say, all of this information that's running around in our minds to a place that it's captured, that you can, you know, go back and revisit it, you can restructure it, you can pressure test it. I think it's, you know, one of the greatest promises of these tools. So looking forward then, you know, as you say, you role modeling for your team, I think, is a huge unlock for many companies. Again, we've had great examples in the book, the CTO of Skyscanner doing the same, Andrew Phillips, or what is the next sort of, you know, horizon for you that you're thinking about and looking forward to experimenting with some of these tools?
I think more and more just being able, we have it within the enterprise now, so we can look at my file system and, you know, augment my thinking with also data. I don't want to forget one anti-pattern that you and I experienced when I went through this process.
Please.
I would tell other leaders. My kids are truth speakers, and at one point it was about grades, and my son, you know, very eloquently, not really, told me, you know, all I do is talk to him about bad grades, or all I do is I'm managed by exception. And I think one of my early experiments with trying to get productivity was building an agent that would go out and look at all the dashboards that I typically look at for, you know, our product health and our resiliency and things like that, availability. And so I built my own agent that would go just like I would normally do, but it would go out, look at all the dashboards, and then bring that summary to me. But 2 things quickly happened. One is it felt like all I was doing was managing by exception, which is not actually the way I want to show up as a leader by any means. The other thing is it quickly poked holes in the way that my data was captured, either if it was captured at the wrong point in time, someone happened to update that report right after or something. So that was one of my lessons learned, is like rethinking the process, not just trying to like automate the process that already exists, and making sure you're going for the outcome you're going for, not just, managing by exception. So I feel like that was one other unlearn I had to do very quickly, or it could have, in my strive to gain productivity, I could have actually eroded trust or eroded things with my team. So that's one thing I would say for senior leaders, is to make sure, like, I'm doing it now to drive more outcomes. It's not about productivity, to make our organization, higher performing, to constantly be challenging all the conventional thinking that we have. So I'm using it for that, but not using it as a productivity hack to kind of manage all the exceptions and create a new red report for people to have to defend or whatever. So I did learn that the hard way, by both the way I manage homework and the way I tried to automate a productivity tool in the beginning that we shouldn't let.
Well, these are so many great insights you've shared today, Misty. As you're describing, automating a process that's not healthy is just going to make the process even unhealthier, as you've described. I think that's a huge, important people remember this, that there's a chance to redesign how work gets done here and figure out what a new, better process is, rather than just trying to make the existing process faster. I think it goes back to this point, I think, that many people will, I hope, hear from this show, is that productivity is great. It's your first step, but really to get to performance or better outcomes, as you're describing, requires a redesign of how you work, how you think, and then challenging this sort of status quo about how work is done. And I think, again, one of the things we've seen, and there's been so much research, I put tons of it in the book as well, is that when people think of these transformation as tools transformation, or just it's about productivity, they fail. When they think that it's about growth and innovation, when they think about its behavior change and look to those types of behaviors, succeed, right? They have massive success. And I think that's, again,
friction. Like,
absolutely.
Unlocking the friction to you showing up as your best self is probably or how can you, contribute your best ideas? That's the unlock, more than productivity. It's like, now I'm able to show up with pressure tested ideas. I'm able to kill ones that, after I pressure test them, either aren't good in the current environment. And so when I think about scaling that, especially in a large enterprise like American Airlines, like, wow, what amazing things is that going to unlock? What constraints that we've embraced over time are we going to unlock? And I think the other thing, and this is part of the challenge, I think, for if we were to look at code tools, it can, at an airline, it's complex and domain knowledge. It takes time to build that up. But these tools can really democratize some of that, or shorten the gap between when you can be productive, but not only that, when you can deliver more complex solutions. And so I think we're all going to have to learn that the best ideas may not come from the most senior person that has all the scars and all the reasons why we haven't done that before. That'll probably be something that we have to kind of put our egos to the side and make sure at big enterprises that we're allowing all this unlock that's going to be happening kind of simultaneously in our orgs, that make sure that someone's not becoming the lid on that.
Misty, it's been amazing, first of all, just to spend time with you. Working together through this has been a joy for me. It's great to see how you're inspiring, both people inside American Airlines. I'm sure as many people listen to this show, you're going to have lots of people reaching out, and please do keep sharing your stories. As you say, learning in public is a really powerful thing. It inspires others. It's great to see you role modeling that at American Airlines and beyond. And thanks very much for being with us on the show.
Thanks so much for having me and being part of my journey. It's awesome.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review, as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.